Joining us online is Alexandra Hudson. She's a writer, popular speaker, and founder of Civic Renaissance. She also has a brand new book out called The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. Alexandra, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Ben, it's a privilege to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So obviously, civility has become something that I think everyone is past. It seems as though even the concept of civility feels as though it died maybe a dozen years ago, and that those who try to engage in civil discussion are now demonized as giving too much to the other side. So when you talk about civility, what do you mean and what don't you mean? Because I think a lot of people perceive civility now to mean sort of concession to an opposing political viewpoint.
It's a great point. A core argument of my book is that there is this essential and often overlooked distinction between civility and politeness. I learned this firsthand when I was in government and saw these two extremes. I saw on one hand, and I served in a very divided time in federal government, 2017 to 2018. I saw on one hand people who were overtly hostile, bellicose, aggressive, willing to do anything to win and gain their proximity to power, whatever their goal was. On the other hand, there were people who were polished and poised and polite, but these are people who would smile and flatter and meet others one moment and stab us in the back the next. And that clarified for me this essential distinction between civility and politeness. So that you could be polite and actually deeply uncivil, deeply undermining and respectful. It could be politeness could be a tool to manipulate others. So politeness is etiquette. It's external. It's technique. It's external, superficial stuff. Whereas civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart, a way of seeing others as our moral equals, beings with innate dignity and worth, beings created with the imago Dei, the divine imprint, and that sometimes actually respecting others requires risking offending them, being impolite, telling a hard truth, engaging in robust debate. There's so much division in our world right now. We're often afraid in our personal lives to have uncomfortable conversations. It just feels like it's easier to kind of sweep difference under the rug. But that's actually not a way to love and respect sometimes those closest to us most. So I argue in the book we need to aim less for politeness, less for the just appearance of virtue, of respecting others, and actually aim for civility instead, actual, true, respectful conduct of others, even if it means offending them, hurting people's feelings, and having uncomfortable conversations.
So it seems to me one of the things that happened, and one of the reasons civility has sort of fallen away, is because in order for there to be civility, in order for you to respect the person you're having a conversation with, they do have to exist within the same common framework of rules. If you're playing chess with somebody and that person is going to upturn the board, you're not going to want to play chess with them, nor are you going to treat them civilly. And so it seems like there's been this sort of reactionary movement that I've talked about a lot on the show, where there was a move to close the Overton window, the range of acceptable discourse, incredibly, incredibly small. And then because it was shut up so tight, where the idea was you can't be civil to anybody who's not inside this Overton window, there was a sort of reactionary move to that, which was blow up the Overton window entirely. And so what that means is that all viewpoints should now be treated with equal respect. Every viewpoint deserves civility. What's the best way to distinguish between viewpoints that deserve civility and viewpoints that don't deserve civility?
It's a great question. And, in my book, I actually don't even make this case that is common in a lot of these pluralistic, heterodox circles. People put forth this argument, all ideas are equal and deserve equal respect and tolerance. And I'm actually not making that argument. I'm saying that every person deserves a bare minimum of respect. And that even if they have a crazy idea on one thing, don't diminish them. Don't write them off based on that one thing. That every person has something to teach us. Every conversation we come to, every experience we have, has something to teach us.
Okay, so why don't we do some examples here? So what would be an example of treating somebody civilly, but with sort of raw truth, as opposed to being uncivil? Because sometimes it's hard to distinguish where the line is.
It's a great question. So, for example, say that you are in a work setting and your boss comes in with a new haircut, and your performance review is later that week, and you feel like an opportunity to butter him up, and you flatter the haircut. You say, "Oh, you look fabulous, like absolutely dapper," even though you don't actually like the haircut that much. That would be an example of using politeness. You're saying something, you're pretending to believe something that you don't for the sake of self-gain, buttering your boss up for your performance review later that week. The civil thing to do, by contrast, would not to lie. not to be obsequious, not to engage in flattery. That's not respecting the other at all. It's never respectful to lie to someone. But instead to either stay silent or find something you can earnestly compliment in good conscience. Many of us this weekend have celebrated Easter, and this past weekend and have come around dinner table with family, friends, and politics has often invaded family dinner tables in an unprecedented way, and so I'm of two minds of how this civility versus politeness distinction could play out around a family dinner table. On one hand, friendship, family relationships, in an ideal world, these are seedbeds of trust and love and deep affection. And those are the ideal places for these deep, controversial, hot button topics. These are the environments where they're best suited to have these dialogue, to have these conversations across differing opinions, because we lack so much basic respect and affection across difference generally today in our broader public life. But at the same time, too often I find, and I argue in my book, that we allow our dinner tables to be defined by these hot button political issues, and just the conversation deteriorates so rapidly that I give everyone permission to actually not talk about these hot button topics. And so, that we've misplaced our meaning in politics, and many have made a religion out of politics, and they can't not talk about these hot button issues everywhere. They've invaded our public and personal lives. So on one hand, these are the places that could be an ideal ground to have these conversations, that it's the civil thing to do, to say, you know what, Uncle Joe, I love you, but I think you're deeply wrong on XYZ issue. That's the civil thing to do, or just to avoid the topic entirely for the sake of a greater good, which is family, friendships, relationships, coming around shared ideas, shared rituals, shared loves.
So it seems that one of the things that has happened so much in our politics of late, and the thing that you're arguing against, is a reliance on emotivism in argument. The emotivism is the theory that effectively the reason that you're making a political argument is because you have certain interior motivations, not because you actively believe the thing. And so instead of taking up the argument, you take up the person. You say that the reason that you're actually making this argument is because you're a bad person, or because you're a sexist or a racist or a bigot or something. Yes. And so once that starts to obtain, then civility is impossible, because now you're actually insulting the person as opposed to making an argument about their argument.
It's such a good point. I mean, just yesterday I was on C-SPAN for Easter morning, and I had several questions that just reminded me of exactly what you just said. Someone said to me, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is really a formative intellectual influence on me, and we drink from a similar intellectual well, from Socrates to Aquinas to Martin Buber and many other, thinkers in the great conversation. And so he's someone I draw from throughout my book. And I mentioned him yesterday in this interview, and someone called in. It was a call-in show, and said, "You know what? You're a white woman. I'm a black man. I don't think that you have any right to draw from Dr. King. That you should not you don't have permission. I'd like you to stop talking about him entirely." And I had someone else call in and saying, I love everything you're saying. It's hard to think that anyone could disagree with it, but I have a question to you about credibility. Tell me, who did you vote for in 2016 and 2020? And so here are two people that called in and wanted to essentialize me to one aspect of who I was, right? A white person, then who did I vote for? And I, with the first question, I told my husband I got this question afterwards. He joked, I would have responded. He said, yeah, I was offended when Dr. King and his work, drew from all these white people, that's so antithetical to his corpus, his body of work. And it's so reductionistic. It's so essentializing and degrading of the human person to try and reduce them to one aspect of who they are, their skin color, who they voted for. But that's the world we live in. We live in a world of cheapened simplicity, where everything's right or wrong, good or evil. And my book is in many ways a humanistic manifesto, extolling the gift of being human and all of our imperfections and all of our nuance and complexity. And I hope that people walk away with an enhanced appreciation of the gift of being human, both in ourselves and others, which is what we need more than ever in this divided time that we find ourselves in.
Well, the book is definitely interesting. Give it a read. It's called The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. Alexandra, really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to meet you.